I've been doing a lot of thinking and reading about the 5G thing, and initially I was like, how bad is it? We've had 3G and we've had 4G, but 5G is different, and I'm going to tell you why it's different. You might find this a different take on it. Now, I spoke at AV9 in England back in the spring, and there's some very, very good presentations there on it, specifically one given by Dr. Graham Dowling. And if you go to the AV website, you can pick up the videos, and they're definitely well worth it. I don't disagree with anything that Dr. Graham and the other people talking about 5G are bringing up, because it's all potentially true. However, I have a different attitude to this, and I'll tell you what it is. Well, the first thing is, the 5G is incredibly powerful, and it is a digital signal. And I've often been concerned over the years about the effects of digital electronics in terms of the human's nervous system as opposed to analog. As yet, from what I can tell, there doesn't seem to be any major issues that have arisen thus far. Now, I'm just saying, as far as I can tell. I may be wrong. We've always had vast amounts of radiation coming from outer space that are far more intense than anything that a 5G transmitter can throw at us. And likewise, we have transmissions coming up from the actual Earth, which you never think about. I mean, the Earth is actually throwing up magnetic waves and other kinds of forms of waves and radiation at us, like radon from the bottom, and we've lived with that forever. The digital signal is the thing that is probably, if there's any concern in terms of technicality. Now, I know they're doing things like ripping down trees on railway embankments, which is absolutely bonkers, because railway embankments, if you take the trees off them, you will dare put in there to act in the same way that seagrass builds sand dunes. It's a stabilization thing. So it makes you wonder if they have a plan to get rid of the railways altogether. Not to mention that this is a massive piece of infrastructure that gets rammed right through with little or no planning application or planning permission or planning guidelines. The public doesn't know about it because it's invisible. It's not like an oil or a gas pipeline or a new stretch of railway or road where it has to go through complex planning, regulations and approval, public hearings, public submissions and so on. 5G, because no one sees it in real life, it gets through just by virtue of its visibility. But there's one thing I want to talk about this, and people, you need to be aware of these things. The more I look into the impetus behind it, the more I see a religiosity. This is the salvation, the redemption, the rapture for the transhumanists. Finally, they'll have a digital transmission system which will have enough power to provide them what they need in terms of their bizarre need to escape human life and attain immortality. However, because we're dealing with a sense of religious thinking, they're only going to see themselves in terms of a kind of a digital crusade or a digital jihad. They're not going to approach it in terms of converting us. I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen. They will offer it. It'll almost be more like a Presbyterian kind of idea, that they will offer it salvation, and the ones who want salvation will take the digital transubstantiation. And that's what this is right now. Just like in the Catholic Mass, where you have the transubstantiation, where you have a piece of communion wafer, a piece of a biscuit, is then infused with the body, the corpus of Christ, Corpus Christi. This is what 5G is giving them. 5G is the transubstantiation, to turn potential chips or circuitry which people incorporate into their body into the digital Christ, the techno Christ has risen kind of idea. And those who are quote unquote saved will be the ones who will go into this transhumanist future. Now, we all know it's crazy, and these people are completely nuts. And they really are terrified that they can't take their millions and their billions with them. And that's what's really driving all this with these people. Because they're soulless and dead inside. They have no idea what it is to be a human being. When they talk about human life, it is nothing like how I or people I know experience human life. They see themselves as sort of like a meat machine. And they want to keep the meat machine indefinitely going. And the only way they feel they can do it is by upgrading it. But they're still trapped in a world of religiosity, that it can only be upgraded through a kind of a spiritual engagement. And this all comes from cosmism, which arose in the Soviet Union in the 1930s and 40s and 50s. The idea that there could be a transubstantiation, a reunion with cosmic beings on other planets through radio transmissions, radio telescopes, and this kind of thing. That because they took the idea of the spiritual world out of society, they transformed it into the cosmic world, into space travel, where Sputnik became a kind of a flying angel, and rocket ships became the method to go to be with the space gods, who were different than the religious gods. They were secular gods, and therefore things like radio transmissions and radio telescopes were like tabernacles. And this is what's happening again because they're cultural Marxists in the West and soulless as well. They're following the same cosmism in terms of the 5G. It is quite brutal and quite frightening, but I also have studied them enough to know they're not going to hold anybody down and force it on them, because that wouldn't work. What they want are the chosen ones, the saved, the special ones, to join them, and they will play on the insecurity and soullessness of the kind of Richard Dawkins, Brian Cox, I fucking love science crowd. They will be completely enraptured by the idea, and they will take into themselves the digital host. It'll be like a Catholic swallowing a communion wafer. They will swallow a chip, or it'll be injected into them, or it'll be infused onto their skin somehow, and that will be their digital communion, their host. And they will take communion, and this will allow the control grid, the digital network powered by 5G and beyond, to enter into their bodies, because the power capacity is there. The power capacity exists enough, and they will transmute, or they will reach the state of transubstantiation, and then they themselves will have a rapture away from being a biological dysfunctional meat box, which what they see themselves and their children as, and on towards the saved, blessed beings who have all these electronic circuits in their bodies, and they're no longer a dirty, filthy human. They are a cyborg, a transhumanist, or whatever they want to see themselves as, but it will be very much in a religious sense, because we're dealing with religious nuts who are secular or they're atheists, but they still function in this religious idea. Like Bill Gates and his wife Melinda Gates see themselves as the angel of death of Africa. That's how they see it. They want to wipe out impure Africans, and how they're not called up on racism is beyond me, because that's exactly what they're doing with all their population reduction things. They're just too damn concerned about all these coloured people in the world. This is what really drives them at the end of the day, because they all live in gated, all-white communities. And that distorted sense of moral imperative is what's also driving the transhumanist 5G thing. It is a religious crusade for secular people. A godlike state for the godless. Of course, those of us who understand and have spiritual sensations within us know perfectly well that this is a complete folly. That our consciousness is not a product of our brain, it's merely a machine that allows us to experience this reality. They cannot grasp that. They can't grasp that. So my attitude to 5G as things stand is only fear 5G in terms of how they approach it. as the digital apocalypse, the digital end times, or the analog end times, or we're going to call it, towards a digital salvation. But you don't have to take part. You can be an unbeliever. You can be a heathen. You can be an analog pagan. And that's what I'm going to do. No chip is going to go inside me in the belief that I'm going to transform beyond this material reality into an eternal digital super being with my transubstantiated consciousness uploaded into the cloud. What do angels live on? Clouds. This is all, we get insights and hints all the time. 5G is just like a biblical crusade. You can say to the preacher man, no, I'm not interested, I'm going to be a pagan. No, I'm not interested, I'm going to be an analog heathen.